Andrew, you want to let the board members in?
Yes, sir. Mr. Navarez, on the live stream, it looks like it's on. Can we change it to gallery view?
Just left.
Oh, okay.
Board members, thank you for being patient. We're trying to live stream this right now through Zoom, so. We ready? We're good, Andrew?
I'm still letting a few more people in. I believe all board members are in.
Madam President, it's 12:02 and I believe we're ready to go. You're on mute, Mrs. Cantu. Still on.
Welcome to our agenda prep for April 5th. We're going to call the meeting to order now, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't see Miss Viapando. Is she on? Mr. Fernandez, can you tell if she's on? Okay, we're going to open up with 6, which gives us quorum. We're going to begin this meeting with a public forum, and I will call out the names of the people that will be speaking. Are we ready with those people? Mr. Fernandez?
Yes, ma'am. So would you like me to admit all 6 right now and then you call on them individually, or do you want me to let them in one by one?
Whichever way is easiest for you. Is it easier to do all 6 and then I just call on them?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's do that. Go ahead and let them in. I do, that way I only read the statement one time. If I have all 6 of them, I could read my statement at the, for everybody.
Yes, ma'am. So they should be joining. I would give it about a minute or 2 just to make sure their audio is connected.
Do you want to say the pledge while we wait? Are we supposed to say the pledge? Agenda prep?
Agenda prep, no.
Oh, okay. You'd think I'd know by now.
It's
So
easy to
Ms. Cantu, it looks like all speakers are connected with audio.
I'm going to read this statement for our public comment. Citizens are offered an opportunity to address the board without prior approval. Presentations shall be informative only. The board requests that presentations not include statements that may be considered defamatory. Presenters should conduct themselves with common courtesy in a respectful manner. In accordance with state law and district policy, disruptive conduct must be avoided so as not to interfere with the meeting. The speakers will have 3 minutes, and our secretary, Ms. Hanson, has agreed to be the timer, as usually happens at our regular public meetings. So we will start with Laura Lacoste. Ms. Lacoste, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Laura Lacoste, and I have 3 students in the school district. I want to thank you for allowing me to speak today. This is regarding the superintendent's decision requiring all students to return to school as of April 12th. To put it lightly, this is concerning. In the email announcement on Thursday from Mr. Fernandez, it states, quote, unless already approved for medical exemption, and quote, all students are required to return to their campuses. Please tell me what the teaching process will be for those that are medically exempt. Will they receive online teaching or paper email assignments? How many students are medically exempt in our district? How many additional dividers and face coverings will each campus receive, and will the campuses receive these prior to April 12th? At Hernandez Elementary, the 3 5th grade classrooms have approximately 22 students per class. While I understand, as written in the Thursday email from Mr. Fernandez, quote, our COVID-19 cases continue to decrease, and quote, how is the district planning to follow the CDC guidelines of 3 feet of social physical distancing? Is the school district's failure rate driving this abrupt change? If so, what are the specific numbers regarding failure rate of students in our district? Also, please break this down even further by campus and in-person versus virtual students. In our specific household, our children have maintained their grades of A's and B's, and our fifth grader has improved his grades from B's and C's pre-pandemic to currently straight A's. As a side note, and to be fully transparent, my freshman has returned to school as of March 1st, but this was only after certain family members have been fully vaccinated. Please help me and other parents understand what specific numbers and/or data led you to this decision. I recognize that my 3 children's learning success may be in the minority, but I fear that with only 38 days left starting April 12th, this will lead to a negative outcome in their grades and what they have become accustomed to. This morning, I found out that at Miller, there are currently 589 students in person and 276 students virtually. Extensive construction continues at this campus. With the potential increase of 276 cars, how will this transition run smoothly? Is the district increasing the number of buses to accommodate this influx of 276 students? In the San Marcos Daily Record piece, Mr. Fernandez states, quote, "Our main goal is to bring students back really just to check on them mentally, socially, academically," end quote. I submit to you that each campus has been attempting outreach to their enrolled students. I implore you, Mr. Cardona, to change this decision as of all students having to return on April 12th and let the parents decide. This disrupts all students, in person and virtual, all teachers and all campuses. With 38 school days left, I fear this will not have an overall positive outcome for our ISD family. I eagerly await your response to my questions. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker will be Anna McFarland.
Good afternoon, school board members. My name is Anna McFarland, and I have 2 children in the district, one at Miller and one at the high school. After hearing from my daughter on Thursday, as her teachers told her prior to parent acknowledgement, everyone will be returning to school April 12th. My husband and I have many questions that are concerning to us. I know that we are limited as to time, so I will ask 4 questions quickly that are the greatest concern. These questions are: was the anxiety level of 6th and 9th grade students being sent back, not knowing where or how in-person learning works, as well as the anxiety of STAR testing, taken into consideration when this decision was made? These kids have no idea where classes are, if they have lockers and where these lockers are, or who they're supposed to be having, when they are supposed to be having lunch. They do not know how to get from class to class or how the in-person day is actually run. Some of these kids have not even stepped into the schools, let alone know where they need to go at any given moment. Did the district take into consideration those who are excelling remotely, possibly dropping their GPA due to their consistency and scheduling being disrupted? As we all know, as well as how those drops would affect the district as a whole. Some of these kids are doing so well because they've had that consistency, and now that consistency will no longer be there. As we all know, parents are constantly being lectured on having consistency for their kids regarding schooling, and now the district has decided that consistency is no longer necessary. How is asynchronous learning with no teacher input not discriminating against those with a medical condition? Seems as if the district has decided that those students aren't as important and do not need the same instruction as healthy students. By all means, I hope this is not the case, but that is how this is coming across to parents. 4th, Miller being under construction will now have an approximately 276 new cars that pick up and drop off, as we are asked to transport our students to and from school. As it is now, from what I've seen, pick up and drop off are chaotic at best. An additional 276 cars in a drop-off pickup line are going to cause all kinds of traffic issues. Those with multiple students at multiple schools will not be able to get those students to school on time. Is that going to go against those students' attendance records, considering some of those students have 0 absences and 0 tardies for this school year so far? It seems as if these logistical issues were not very well thought out. I have many more questions, but we'll stop at these 4. I would also like to say thank you to the teachers and administration for all they have done during this pandemic. Up to this point, I was very pleased with how the district was handling COVID-19. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing the answers to these questions, as well as the many others that parents have.
Our next speaker will be Amber Ledoux.
Sorry about that. Thank you, SMCISD board, for allowing me a moment to speak. My name is Amber Ledoux, and I have 4 students in your School District. I just have a few quick questions and observations in regards to the April 1st email. Question 1, what are the protocols going to be for the classrooms regarding spacing? I know for a fact that my daughter's geometry class has 30 students in it, which looking at pre-pandemic situations, this seems challenging and even more so with the COVID protocols. Question 2, what are the lunch plans to keep spacing and allowing adequate time for eating? Currently, the spacing protocols are adequate, but the schools are at a reduced capacity. How can this remain possible at 100% capacity? Question 3, in your letter, it states that I should be receiving a letter from my campus. Miller, as you've heard before, is under construction. I have not received one thus far. It has been explicitly stated that the preference is for all students to be picked up and dropped off by their parents. Since I have 2 children at Miller and have seen the great fiasco in regard to pick up when I try to drop something off around the same time, my concern is what that procedure will be when about a third of the people are coming back at that time. My observation 1, SMCISD has done a fantastic job at keeping all of the students and staff safe thus far. Observation 2, you as a board have done a great job in keeping us informed while allowing us the flexibility to choose the best course of action for our family dynamics. Observation 3, your most current email seems to contradict the face-to-face attendance choice. This email seems like a bureaucratical ploy for STAR testing results. I know that everyone says this isn't the case, but as a former educator, I have not seen another reason this seems more plausible than this bureaucratical one. Observation 4, by not continuing to have synchronous classes, those with medical exemptions from returning face-to-face are possibly at a disadvantage during this unusual year. Observation 5, many in our district are in a financially fragile state. This quick implementation of a change in course can cause undue financial hardship as clothes, shoes, supplies, etc. are needed to return face-to-face. Thank you very much for all that you've done and all of the hard work that has gone into making our kids successful in this year of chaos. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sylvia Muzzy.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you for the time today. One of my points is to echo what Ms. McFarland said. I have 3 kiddos in the school district, and my 9th grader, my middle child, has expressed anxiety for going back. She's an incoming freshman. So while she is participating in band and has gone to the band hall, she's never really had the opportunity to go into the high school and get to learn the outlay of it. And so she came to me again last night and she's really nervous. And so I was wondering if the board could, or the school administration can encourage maybe an orientation for those coming into the schools for the first time, for as far as like high school, and then Miller Goodnight for those children coming, first time sixth graders and first time 9th graders. I think maybe if that can be pulled off, that would relieve a lot of the anxiety for those children that have never stepped foot on that campus, just to at least learn where their classrooms are, what they're supposed to do, where to go to lunch and what to do. I mean, she's focusing on small details that are really making her nervous. And then just last, I think, the efforts have been really great throughout the school year. My kindergartner has been going to school since the opportunity came for her to go in person. And then my 2 older children have been doing virtual learning. And while, of course, it's a disruption, I think they'll be fine going back and they'll adjust. But I do plead that we do give the opportunity to those kids that have never been on a campus to go and see it before the school days or before April 12th, whether it's during the day or in the evening, or maybe offer 2 options for kids that can go during the school day with admin, and then maybe after school hours or after working hours for parents to go with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Heath Goins. Heath Goins.
Hello, all. Excuse me. Thank you for giving me a few moments to speak. I appreciate the time, and appreciate everyone else for your words and your responses as well. I think, to me, I'm just kind of echoing what I've heard a little bit already, is that the big question we have is just why. We've been sent a communication with no reasoning behind it, basically. No thought process, no explanation as to when or who came upon this decision. The notification didn't even have a signature at the bottom with anyone basically leading the charge or taking responsibility, if you would, and saying, you know, having their name attached to this letter. Being a healthcare professional, it is my concern having a daughter who's in the school district. She's been doing wonderful with the distance learning, and being that the numbers are what they are, and we can all go look at the numbers as far as healthcare is concerned, especially vaccination rates are very, very low, not anywhere near where they need to be. And we're just, in my opinion, putting out more risk than is necessary or even warranted at this time, especially when we have such little time left in the school year. We should be something that, okay, if we wait till the fall, we get our numbers up, we get things where they need to be, or even trending in the right direction, then that would be something perfectly acceptable. But however, trying to do this last minute switch, it just seems very unwarranted and really unnecessary. And that's really the big question that I have as to why. And then also with the distance learning, you know, those who have a child who maybe does have a medical exemption, or maybe it's not even a child that has a medical exemption, but someone in the family. And I did notice that medical exemption form really doesn't address that. It addresses mainly the child. But a lot of these children in these multi-generation homes, especially, have someone at home who is going to be at risk or high risk patient. And they are the ones who are needing to be protected really from the child who is going to go back to school. And so these are some of the questions that I have, and I would just really, really appreciate some clarification. Again, thank you all for all your time that you put in, and I just look forward to hearing more information from you. Thank you.
Thank you to all the speakers. Our superintendent did make that decision. I'm sure those speakers are, if they don't know, he is our leader for our school district, and that was his decision. And so I'm sure that he will have a follow-up through principals to let each speaker know some of the reasoning that went behind this major decision. I will
Ms.
now.
Cantu, Ms.
Yes,
Cantu,
sure.
there might be another speaker. I'm not real sure. We might have had somebody else.
Is there another speaker, Mr. Fernandez?
I thought we had 6.
I had 5 listed. Did anyone else request? Unless they requested after I had already posted the 5.
If you would allow me, just, I can't answer all the questions, but if you'll allow me just to kind of go through the process.
Yes.
Just so we can dispel a couple of myths. It was not Mr. Cardona solely that made this decision. It was a team decision. I met with all the principals. I met with all cabinet members, and we began having this discussion. Mainly, I think the question was why? Mainly because we needed to bring kids in due to some mental health concerns. I won't go into those, but in the past 10 months, we have had 4 high school students who are remote learners who have unfortunately passed away. There were some other issues at different levels. We were looking at the numbers, and really, we have always looked at the numbers. I think most community members who are on here will agree we have done a really good job of working through this pandemic since last March, and we ask for that same leeway as we go through this. Mr. Heath Goins made a good point about the medical exemption form. While it does not state, while it refers to the student only, we met this morning with the principals, and it does apply to the families. So you'll hear the CDC comorbidity. So if a family brings to us a note that says a family member has this issue, then we will continue with asynchronous instruction. Really what we're stopping is our teachers doing live instruction. We have our learning management system. I think our parents on here are familiar with Canvas and the other platforms, and so we'll continue utilizing those. Canvas does a great job of tracking attendance. It logs parents in. It allows teachers and parents to communicate. And like we did in August, we have given great flexibility to our principals to work with each of their families. So we don't know what takes place with like Mrs. Ledoux's family. We don't know those circumstances, but if she has proven, if her children have been successful, if they've been attending, really we're just stopping the live video portion, and those principals can work a plan with those families. I'm trying to respond to each of the emails because there's some really good questions regarding spacing. That's why Mr. Wozniak's on this phone. He is working with every principal. Questions were asked about PPE equipment. Every campus has enough PPE equipment, dividers, sanitation devices. And just to allay the anxiety, I get the anxiety. I have children who have anxiety. I have anxiety. I have had anxiety for a long time. And so I understand that there are legitimate concerns with that. We ask you just to work with your principals and counselors. They know you better than I do. They will work a plan that meets your children's needs that I think will be beneficial, but it is time for us to bring kids back in. It's going to happen at some point, whether it's now or in August. We never have a building that's 100% of capacity, just attendance doesn't account for that, but we will be very flexible. Mr. Fernandez is going to be following up. One of the apologies I need to make is we had asked our staff members not to say anything so we could send a message from the district. And obviously that did not happen because word started spreading early that morning. And so I do want to apologize to the community for that happening. That's never our intention. We had been communicating with our school board about what was getting ready to happen, but we do understand that our communication, and that's my fault, didn't happen the way it should have. Having said that, we continue to empower our principals to work with their families. And again, it's really just the live video portion. Our teachers, I think we can all agree, have been working really hard for the past year. We need to cycle them back for their mental health. It's not just about the kids' mental health. It's about our teachers' mental health as well. They have become really good at using Canvas, and we know Canvas. And at the secondary level, we have programs like Edgenuity. The high school has Phoenix. There's a lot of programs to help meet kids' needs and get them through the last 9 weeks. But we do agree that we need to start checking on our kids before we release them for the summer, because in some cases they just go away. I know that may not answer everybody's question, but I ask that you trust us. We have proven this year that what we do is best for kids and for our families. We have adapted as we needed to adapt. That's what having a plan that's iterative allows us to do. And I'm sure we're going to make mistakes moving forward that we'll have to change. I do know the traffic patterns at Miller, having lived that with my own child. I don't envy that. And so we will look at that, I promise you. Our principals are involved in every step of the way. We have involved our teachers in every step of the way to try and mitigate concerns. And again, I just ask you for a little bit of patience and grace, but really to answer the why question, I think we can all agree on this call that 4 students is one too many, having have passed away. And that's the ones that we know about. The trauma from this pandemic is real, but I think we have some good systems in place. Since this pandemic has taken place, we have implemented communities in school at all secondary schools, which is another resource for families, along with our social-emotional counselors. And so I think we have a good plan. Like I said, will we be perfect? I doubt it, but I have no doubt that community members like those on this call will help us navigate that as we move forward. And just to dispel any myths, I actually literally said to teachers on a call with them, I could care less. I know this is bad and I shouldn't say this being recorded and live. I could care less about the STAR test at this point. I care more about checking on the well-being of kids and making sure that before the summer is out that we have them in. We do have our medically fragile students who have a plan in place, an IEP in place. We will continue that because we do not want to disrupt that program that's in place with each of those kids. And we really are trying to tailor an individual plan for each child, not knowing each child's needs. And so I appreciate y'all bringing your concern. I have some of your emails with those concerns, but if you would like to email me, I'll create a one-pager. Mr. Fernandez will be coming out with some more in-depth communication this week and moving forward. And like I said, we'll work with you. Our principals know they've been given great flexibility in working with the families.
Thank you. Can we move forward then and begin the review of our agenda for our regularly scheduled meeting?
Yes, ma'am. Madam President, members of the board, we will have a superintendent's report next board meeting. That superintendent report will be a report by Dr. Tracy Benson, our third-party equity auditor who is conducting an audit. He'll give you an update. Mr. Wozniak will probably give a safety update. We will then proceed item 5 into closed session as authorized by sections 551.071, 551.072, and 551.074 of the Texas Government Code. We have 3 items: A, level 3 grievance, Jessica Favela; B, discuss administrator contracts, renewals and extensions; discuss teacher and other professional personnel contract renewals; D, consultation with legal counsel regarding damage caused to vehicles parked on district premises, reimbursement of expenses and matters related thereto. And I'll let Mr. Barton talk about this one specifically because it's unique.
You may have heard, but we had a very unique situation a few weeks ago where a telephone pole failed in one of our parking lots. And in falling, it damaged a few vehicles there. That is certainly far beyond anything that we expected. And Mr. Cruz will be there to explain the legalities of it, but our insurance company has not offered to cover that expense for those employees. And so we're going to talk to the board about what latitude we have to make sure they don't have any out-of-pocket expenditure because of this.
Okay.
Ms. Cantu?
Yes.
I had a question on this item. Mr. Barton, is this a San Marcos CISD telephone pole or a City of San Marcos telephone pole?
Sorry, I said that wrong. It's a light pole, not a telephone pole, but it was in the Bowie parking lot. It actually belongs to us. It's been there since the very beginning of, since the school was opened. I will show you pictures and all the good stuff, but this is just absolutely unexpected. We've changed our preventative maintenance to evaluate all those poles in the last few weeks, and we don't see anything else like it anywhere else. Following the freeze, we're not sure if that caused it, but it's just something that's clearly out of the blue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Barton. It was just that you said telephone pole, so obviously just wanted clarification that that wasn't something not owned by the ISD, but if it was a light pole on our property, then I look forward to having this conversation at our Monday meeting.
My mistake. I apologize.
Okay, we can continue.
Item 6, the board will reconvene in open session to take action if necessary on items discussed in closed session. Item A, action to grant or deny Jessica Favela's level 3 grievance. Item B, consideration and possible approval of administrative contract renewals and extensions. Item C, consideration and possible approval of teacher and other professional personnel contract renewals. Item D, discussion and possible action to approve resolution authorizing reimbursement for damage to vehicles on district property at Bowie Elementary School. Before I go into item 7, just so the board members know, this is a live. I want to thank Mr. Nevarez and Mr. Fernandez who got this agenda prep live stream so the community could watch. I know that was a big concern. Item 7, reports and information items. A, middle of the year academic report. Item B, proclamation 2021, overview of pre-K materials. Mr. Nevarez will present that. Item C, Mr. Sandoval will present a construction update. Item D, quarterly investment report. Item E, quarterly financial report by Dr. Barton. Item F, report on trustees continuing education hours from April 2020 to present. Item 8, approval of consent agenda items, approval of minutes for regular scheduled board meeting on March 8th, 2021, and special call meeting on April 5th, 2021. Item 9, items for action, consider approval of district auditor. Mr. Barton.
Yes, sir. We continue to update our professional services as the trustees had asked us to do, I believe, about a year and a half ago. And so we've been steadily doing that over the past few months, and we're continuing that process. We'll bring them a recommendation.
Item B, consider approval of proclamation 2021. Item C, consider action regarding membership of central office committee. Ms. Cantu, I don't know if you want to mention.
Since we have a vacancy, we'd like to bring it back to the board for an official replacement. We do have a volunteer that has offered to serve on that committee. And so at that time, we will take action on that.
Item D, consider approval of budget amendments. Dr. Barton.
Right now, we only have one, and it's a movement between functions. It's not asking any general fund from the trustees. All I'll say is in our budget process, in planning for next year, our campuses and departments have been able to do a better job evaluating the money they've spent or left unspent this year. A lot of it related to travel due to COVID. And so we want to make sure that that money that was set aside in a function where travel could occur can actually be utilized for unique needs in the home stretch of this school year. And that just takes moving that money into the proper function.
Madam President, that completes the agenda portion.
Ms. Halsey, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Superintendent Cardona for addressing those parent concerns. I share many of them, and I think your clarification was very helpful. And I just had 2 additional requests during the superintendent's report. One, I understand that we will be discontinuing synchronous learning for students who continue to be remote, but I would assume that that doesn't mean that those students will be entirely on their own in their learning, correct? They will still receive teacher input, and knowing our teaching staff the way that I know them, I'm sure needs to have a Zoom, needs to have a face-to-face connection with the teacher, that those teachers will be able to make that happen. It's just not the live streaming Zoom feed. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. I know, like, I'll use Mendez Elementary. They have a block for remote learning built into their time. So they're restructuring that. And so we'll go back to, if you remember, when we had office hours, so to speak, where you could do live meetings with your teachers and stuff just to get support if you need it. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of teachers who do videos and upload them into Canvas, which will continue. But it's just that live portion that we will ask our teachers not to do, as we try to check on all of our students as we end the year.
Great, thank you. That's super helpful. And I think providing our campuses with the flexibility to determine, if there are special needs for families that go beyond just medical exemption, I think that's really critical. And I know that creates additional logistics, but I appreciate everybody for taking that on. My second request is in the superintendent's report around safety and reopening. Could you please provide us with the details of the suicide prevention and response plan? Since we understand that this is the well-being, the mental health well-being of our students is one of the primary driving factors, I think, making sure that we are able to care for kids during the final weeks of school and going into the summer. So.
Yes, ma'am. I actually have a call at 2:30 with Crystal Lopez regarding this.
Super, thank you.
Any other questions? Because we do need to adjourn and go into our workshop, our first budget workshop for this incoming year.
Madam
And-
Board President, I have several items.
Go ahead, Mr. Arredondo.
Thank you, President Cantu, Superintendent Cardona. So my first being, I'm going to request that we agendize an additional one-time stipend in the amount of $250 for all ISD employees who have received their COVID-19 vaccination up into this point, and that window be extended to June 1st. If it's the intent for the ISD to reopen fully and to bring all of the students back, I understand that we have somewhere north of 800 ISD employees who have been vaccinated thus far. And I hope that, with some type of economic incentive, we can get that number even higher. It's my understanding that Mr. Fernandez and staff have done a pretty awesome job at educating employees as to why the vaccination is important, why it is safe, and why it is necessary. But I believe in this instance, the board can do a little bit more to incentivize our employees to hopefully receive that vaccination, especially because they can receive it on ISD property. So that is my first agenda item request, Mrs. Cantu. My second, it is somewhat related to the appointment of a new committee person on the ISD Central Office Committee. When this conversation started earlier this spring, we had discussed that our current lease at the Ulen Road facility is up in November, and that there was a 6-month notification of whether we were going to extend that relationship, continue it on a month-to-month basis, or move out of the facility in November. So I'm interested, and if that's an update from staff or from the committee itself, I want to know what our status is on that, because obviously, if we continue to occupy the Ulen Road facility in any way, shape, or form past November of this year, that is coming at a financial cost. And historically, the board has just let that lease roll over or lapse and extend the expenditure of those funds. And I want this board, at least personally, to be more cognizant of those expenditures. So I think it's in April that we have to review this to give the landowner the 6-month notification one way or the other. So that is my second agenda item request, is, I guess, discussion and possible action regarding our lease agreement at the Ulen Road facility. And I'm confident that Mr. Barton can provide any subsequent financial information that action would require.
Since we already have that item on the agenda for the appointment, we can add the words "an update on current status" to that. Now, if you wanted additional, then it would have to be a separate agenda item.
Yeah, I didn't mean that it would need to be included in the same line, but since we're already talking about it, then adding an additional bullet underneath to discuss the lease obligations of our current
Update and lease
central. Not just an update though, but possible action, right? So if the committee is not recommending anything in the near future, that means we're going to stay at the Ulen Road property, which means we are going to renew the lease there, which means we're going to be allocating an expenditure of in excess of $100,000 or so to do that for an additional year. So I want that conversation to take place, and I want to know what that budgetary impact will be, especially as we're about to adjourn and go into a budget workshop, right? Because that money has to come from somewhere.
Thank you. So those were your two items, Ms. Halsey? Ms. Halsey?
Sorry. Yes, Mr. Arredondo's question reminded me of something that I will be asking about, and so I wanted to make sure Mr. Wozniak has a heads up. During his update on the safety plans, I'll be interested in hearing about additional vaccination clinics that have taken place on campus or that are planned, and specifically whether or not we will be able to offer the vaccine to our 16, 17, and 18-year-old students, because I think it would be a terrific thing if we could do that. I'm just get them vaccinated, obviously with parental permission, but get that taken care of on our campuses.
You've got it. We've already begun that discussion with Hayes County.
Awesome. Thanks.
That's great. Ms. Mejia?
Thank you. So I would like to add an agenda item and also like add on to Ms. Halsey's request. So I do agree that we should make it a priority to try to vaccinate our students who qualify, but also their families, because if we are going to be requiring all students to come back to campus, they do have parents that could potentially be at risk. And, you know, having them be on campus puts them at risk in getting the virus and, you know, taking it back home to a parent that could have a health condition. So if we could look into that, that would be awesome. And then also like my other agenda item request would be to consider making a requirement to have all district employees to take diversity training every single semester.
Thank you.
Ms. Cantu?
Yes, Mr. Arredondo?
It's Mr. McLaughlin this time,
Oh,
but I have
I'm
another
sorry.
item just
I'm sorry.
as we circle around.
Mr. McLaughlin?
I just, these individual trustee requests, as presiding officer, are you expecting that they would need a second in order to make it on the agenda? Or do you intend to put all these things on? Because I think Mr. Arredondo's idea about consciously making a decision to extend the lease before the 6-month window would be a good annual, well, hopefully not too many annuals, but good thing for the board to do. So I second that request of the 4 requests that I heard.
Thank you. I can add your second to it.
So just as a, I guess, process discussion now, it was my understanding just when we have these agenda preparation meetings, if a trustee requests an item, since it was brought in front of the entire body, it did not need a second. And I'm fine if it does. Just moving forward, if we as a team of 8 can decide what that is. I always thought that, you know, you bring it up at agenda prep, it goes on there, but any other way, shape, or form, you would need 2 trustees per board policy. And maybe that's just an assumption on my part that I assumed incorrectly, but just to respond to Mr. McLaughlin, if I need second trustees on any of these items, I will try and find them by the end of today. For those items that didn't receive a second on the Zoom call. But my last comment in regards to this conversation, Ms. Cantu and Superintendent Cardona. So it's pretty obvious my personal objections to the ISD's reopening plan and the concerns that I have, and I think the concerns that a lot of community members and parents and even students have. And we've seen that in emails and Facebook postings over the weekend. And, you know, I'm sharing all of this with you because I just want to share my thought process as I've contemplated utilizing ISD's board policy where 2 trustees can request a special called meeting and, you know, working with Juan Cruz and, you know, formulating an agenda item, discussion and possible action regarding the ISD's reopening plan. And obviously, I think that would be a very caustic process to take place, right? And I think now more than ever, we have to work together than working against each other and support each other and have confidence in individuals' abilities to do the job. But with all of that being said, Mr. Superintendent, I do hope that within the next several days, we see a lot more communication to ISD families. Even today during the Zoom call, you stated that in one family's instance, they're, you know, finding academic success at home, they are virtual, and you have given principals the latitude to continue in that format if it is best for them. which I appreciate and I support, but that isn't the communication that ISD families have received thus far, right? And when we discussed the ISD's reopening a year ago, one of the biggest concerns that I had was the, I think, outsized, overly sized ability of a principal to make campus-based decisions that would bring inequities across the ISD, right? So maybe a principal at X campus allows a family to remain remote, but a principal at another campus does not, right? So in these instances, when it comes to modes of instruction and how our families are able to utilize ISD resources, I would really appreciate some uniformity in that. And so I don't know if you can address that, and if you can clarify if I heard incorrectly your comments to one of the parents about if a student is successful, they can stay virtual or not, and that's the ability of a principal to make that decision. Am I way off base here, or?
Just like we did in August. I mean, so just as you're asking me stuff, I think I would ask for the same. I think our processes has gotten better. Mr. Wozniak is our safety, and he has a safety team, a health team with the nurse and some others. And so the principals get a request from a campus, they send it to him, and then they review it, and so I think that keeps your equity piece in line. But as a reminder, we've had about 65 to 70% of our campus in the building. We started about 50% in October, and it's gone up. So we're talking about, bringing in specific families that have been, remote. But yes, we have refined our processes. That's actually the discussion we had with our principals this morning. Dr. Ruiz Mills talked about consistency across schools and levels. With our principals, we walked through scenarios, and ultimately, I am a firm believer that the best decision for kids and families need to be made at the school level. I think we would all agree with that, but there does need to be some oversight, and that's where Mr. Wozniak and Dr. Baez with employees and Dr. Ruiz Mills and Ms. Owens come into play, so that if that doesn't happen, we even talked about, if Mr. Wozniak and the team don't make a decision, then do they go to Ms. Pearson as part of the next step in filing a grievance so that we can get the parents something really pretty quickly.
And I appreciate that. And I guess based on the information that I've seen, the district's email that was sent out to all campuses and no subsequent communication, at least at a district-wide level, there might be I'm assuming there's communication happening campus to parent individually, but the ISD's original notification said unless already approved, so approved prior to the email of a medical exemption, your child was supposed to come back. And subsequently, we've now heard that there is a process possibly for families to continue remote learning in some way, shape, or form. And so if that is the case and that is true, then obviously I want that information to be disseminated, as soon as possible, and that parents know what that district process is that is uniform across campuses, if it's working through the campus's principal or security team or, Mr. Wozniak and his group, whatever that looks like, because in my opinion, that is not information that is available to the public just yet. And maybe I'm jumping the gun doing this, having this conversation. And if so, I apologize. But again, I think having that information in parents' hands, guardians, that would obviously address a lot of their concerns, especially for those students who, for whatever reason, I think have flourished working remotely, right? And, on numerous occasions, some of us have talked about how, we should be on the sides of parents and what parents think is best for their kids. And so in this instance, I hope we continue that belief system and side with parents if they think it is safest for their families, for their child to remain at home and receive instruction that way. I hope we communicate that there is a process for families to do that outside of just that medical exemption that was referenced in the ISD's communication last week. So thank you, Ms. Cantu.
Ms. Cantu.
And to talk about what I always thought that when we had when I came in, when we had our agenda prep and we started the agenda prep review, it was to decide if those items should be on for that month or if we needed to add items or to take off items. So I think as my understanding from our board operating procedures, and I was trying to look it up to quote it, but I didn't have enough time. When we review the agenda, we can add and take away items. And then after that, then you need a second. There's specific operating procedures that we approved ourselves for.
Yeah, so President Cantu, I believe you have that power, but also over the course of the last 6 years, presiding officers have elected that a single trustee request could go under the presiding officer could put it on the upcoming agenda, which would be the third Monday in April meeting, or the subsequent agenda in May. And so you could, any of those ideas that Ms. Mejia and Mr. Arredondo floated, at least from my understanding, you can certainly put on the agenda. I just spoke expressly about the one on the lease extension because that deadline's prior to the May meeting. So to me, it wouldn't make sense to flex that to May, and I didn't know what you were going to do with it. So I think you have that ability, but not that obligation.
Totally agree that we should add that to the April agenda because time's of the essence in terms of our contract with the lease. So we will add it, Mr. Cardona. If we're done with all agenda items that we want, Ms. Hanson.
I'm just moving to adjourn if we're ready for that.
I'm ready.
I have one more, sorry, Ms. Cantu, and then I'm done, but it's about the budget.
Okay.
So because administrative contracts and it looks like other contracts are being asked to be renewed or extended at this board meeting, as we have this budget workshop conversation, there's a very high likelihood that I'm going to request that the board take action on salaries and benefits at the April meeting, just because historically, and we can all look back at the recorded meetings time and time again, I have been a vocal advocate of not asking administrators or teaching professionals to sign blank contracts. I understand that we've never reduced their pay, so there's always a guarantee that they're going to make at least what they made this current fiscal year going into next year. That's not to say that that's a guarantee, but we've at least continued that rule. But again, I just am very hesitant about asking anyone to sign a contract that's blank. I understand that that might be the norm in the industry, and I understand that, but just because it's what's done, in my opinion, doesn't mean it's what's right. So as we go through the budget workshop, just as an FYI to everyone, I might circle back and ask that salaries and benefits be placed on the April agenda. But I wanted to mention that now during the agenda preparation portion of the meeting, just so everyone would know that. So thank you.
Okay, now we'll accept your motion, Ms. Hanson.
I move that we adjourn.
A second. Ms. Villapando seconds. All in favor, raise your hand. One. All opposed, 0. Let's adjourn the meeting and begin our budget agenda. And I'm sorry that we've gone past our 1 o'clock. Normally, I mean, by the time we finish, it'll be after 1. So if anybody has to leave, we understand that some of you are at work and you may have an obligation for an appointment. We did not intend for this meeting to have gone this long. Thank you, Dr. Barton, you're ready to go.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Fernandez is queuing up our presentation. And it's just 9 slides here. I promise you we won't belabor the point. I do want to share with you that these are the topics we're going to discuss today. And Mr. Arredondo, we will address exactly what you spoke about. So I promise if it's not satisfactory, challenge me at that time. but I'm going to talk to you briefly about the challenges of HB3 and the funding formula. We're going to talk about some of the unresolved variables that the district still hasn't answered going into our budget process. I'm going to give you a revenue projection, a starting point for looking at our revenue in this year's budget. We're going to talk about salary scenarios and then a look ahead, a timeline of action. And I think that's where we'll address Mr. Arredondo's concern. I also want to bring to your attention Ms. Stephanie Munoz, who is Executive Director of Human Resources, will participate in the presentation for several slides later on. Go ahead, Mr. Fernandez. These are some of the general themes that we're required to make sure we emphasize with trustees when it comes to HB3 and the budget. Number one, we have to emphasize that revenue is based on students and their characteristics. The days of allowing increasing property values to drive revenue to the school district are over. And you'll recognize that because the last 2 years, every time we bring you a tax rate decision in August, it's to compress the tax rate in proportion to the increase in property values. So it's only our enrollment and the characteristics and programs of our students that drive our revenue. Therefore, without increasing our enrollment, new spending, pay raises, all of that has to be offset within our existing budgets, our programs, or our staffing. And the biggest challenge of HB3, it should be an opportunity, except for the instability of this year and next year because of COVID. Funding is based on current year values and students. So you don't exactly know what your enrollment, your programs, and your student outcomes are going to look like next year. In the prior system, you were able to have some advanced indications of what those are, but right now it's very volatile, to say the least. This year has been very interesting. Go ahead, Mr. Fernandez. These are the major issues that we're dealing with that might impact our budget decisions through June when we have to set our budget, and even after we'd have to make some adjustments. Number one is remote learning. The state has not approved remote learning for next year. And to be honest, it's been a good thing in some places when it comes to budget, because we have some campuses and some grade levels specifically that are doing a wonderful job engaging students, 98% plus attendance. But we also have some places where our engagement is not as high. And so if remote learning were to continue, it would change our budget. Not necessarily for the worse, but it would change it. And so we'd have to change our projections. There was an issue out there at the legislative level that has slowed down, but that's funding by ADA or funding by enrollment. Right now, we're funded based on our average daily attendance, which could be a little bit volatile based on the situation. But funding by enrollment seems a little bit more stable to people. That doesn't seem to have had a hearing and moved as quickly in the last week. So I'm not sure it's as pressing as it was when we wrote this presentation, but there are some legislative initiatives out there that would require the district to create some staffing or implement some programs that might impact our budget. But the major driver is our projections for 21-22 student enrollment. And that's something that we watch carefully every couple of weeks. We sit down and look at every grade level at every school and make sure our staffing is in alignment. And that's something we've been doing since January, and we will continue through May when we bring you a final budget number. I would add one more thing to that list, Mr. Fernandez, before I speed past it, and it's just because it came up last week. The city of San Marcos has recalculated how it handles stormwater drainage of all things in this past year. We got notice in September, and we got to start seeing those bills come in October and November. And in a lot of places, it saved us a couple dollars or a negligible change. It was just a recalculation. But in 2 to 3 of our biggest facilities, the change has been dramatic, almost a 300% increase. And so the district is speaking with the city about the impact of that policy change on their end and really asking to understand better, because it is almost a 6-figure shift in our budget. And that's an unresolved variable that we're working on right now with the city to try and make sure our money's being spent on students and not on, I don't want to say not on something that's meaningful. Our utilities are a fair charge. But at the same time, that kind of change, we don't understand the calculation and we don't understand why they did it. And right now it's unresolved for us. When it comes to our revenue projection, our major drivers are our students, their characteristics, and their programs. And I'll just give you a couple of signposts or bullet points here on how we're projecting for next year. Through March 12th, our enrollment in the district was 7,998 students, and our average daily attendance was 7,166 students. That's about an 89% attendance rate. And for next year, we are projecting an enrollment of 8,149 students. So not quite getting back the 200 students that we lost this year, but definitely growing and bringing students back into the school district who maybe are not learning with us this year. And our average daily attendance, we're projecting at 7,428, and that's moving from an 89% attendance rate to a 91% attendance rate. Those are fairly conservative projections, and when you work the revenue out from that, it's $81,699,896 is our projected revenue right now. Because we worked so conservatively with our projections for this school year, that's actually up about $500,000 from our revenue projection for this school year. So we're not in dire straits when it comes to revenue. We're not slashing the budget. We went into this year with a really conservative projection. We've received the hold harmless in the first semester. We're in good shape for this year's budget. We have received most of our revenue. The state side is not really, we haven't finished that out yet. We won't know till the end of the year, but our local revenue is there. And so we're fairly, I won't say pleased, but or excited, but we're pleased with next year's revenue projection that it's up from what we had this year.
Good afternoon. So going into possible options for compensation, one would be no change, so leaving salaries the same. Our second option would be what we generally do, a general pay increase that you, the board, would approve. Our third option is something that was brought forward last March, and it's a one-time mid-year supplement. So if in October we received our financial audit, there were some savings, you, the board, could approve a one-time mid-year supplement with no strings attached. Or fourth option is a mid-year incentive, much like we did this year for COVID, where you would approve a one-time payment for retention. Next slide. The next slide is our possible options, and no change would be if the board decided to have a freeze and not approve any compensation increases. And then the next column would be what the board approved last year as far as compensation increases. And then we would open it up today for you to give us some ideas of what you, the board, are looking forward to.
President Kintu.
Yes, Mr.
Are we
McDonald.
holding that till the end or doing that now?
Yes, sir. We'll come back to that at the end.
All right.
Mr. Barton?
Yes, ma'am. On the matter of timeline, our recommendation to the board is that we come back together on May 3rd for an agenda prep budget workshop in the evening. At that workshop, we would evaluate the salary scenarios that you give us here today, and we would provide you the cost of any cost implications of any decision. You would consider stipends and compensation at that meeting, and we would also set the public hearing date for the tax rate and budget. Mr. Arredondo, or Trustee Arredondo, the May 3rd date is within the window for an employee to sign their contract. So I think the major concern on our end would be we can't return good information to you at our April meeting. But the May 3rd still allows an employee who wants to know their compensation package before signing a contract. They would have that information and it would be within the appropriate window. We have two other meetings if we weren't able to make a decision on May 3rd. May 17th is our regularly scheduled board meeting, and June 7th could be a budget workshop if the trustees wanted to extend a decision or to explore any information at that time, but those meetings aren't necessary. And then finally, on June 21st, we would like to approve our budget. That's our regularly scheduled board meeting. We could hold our public hearings for tax rate and budget, approve the budget, and we'd like to hold till the third week of June just because the legislature is in session And so if they make any decisions that would have an impact on our budget, that would hopefully give us time to adjust, although they could still act after June 21st. Mr. Fernandez, that brings us to this last slide. And we've cleared it out for you. And so at this point, we just want to sit back and listen to the trustees and understand exactly what you want us to bring to you with regard to compensation.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Sure. I mean, I'd like to see a 3% to teacher, 2% to admin, $1 to staff, at least numerically what that would do.
Anyone else? Ms. Halsey? Ms. Halsey?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Munoz, could you please remind us on what the lowest hourly rate currently is in the district?
Our starting hourly rate is $13 an hour.
Okay, so in addition to what Mr. McLaughlin asked for, I would like to see the $3 or 3% increase to all employees, salaried employees, and a $2 increase to hourly staff.
So you're saying, Ms. Halsey, that our entry level would be $15 an hour?
Correct.
Thank you. I would like to see that as well, at the $15 an hour entry level.
Ms. Cantu.
Yes, Mr. Arredondo.
Okay, so I have my own scenario request. 1% for administrators, 1.25% for teachers, and then $1.50 for hourly employees.
There you go. Anyone else? Ms. Mejia? Ms. Villapando, anyone else? Ms. Hanson?
Yes, will this include the things you talked about before on the other slides? Any incentive pay or mid-year adjustment or something like that?
No, ma'am, that wouldn't be included unless, and Ms. Munoz did a great job describing it. Trustees could at this meeting say, we intend to give a $1,500 mid-year incentive. We could budget that.
Okay.
Or you could just say, we intend to discuss a mid-year incentive pay in October, November, and then look at the status of enrollment, look at the state of whatever money hopefully we're able to return to the general fund at the end of the year and make a decision on that amount. So the key is just establishing that you intend to discuss this and consider a mid-year supplement. Then you have all the freedom. You don't have to tie yourself to an amount in June for the remainder of next year.
So you'll bring the three scenarios from the scenarios from the three different board members. Ms. Villapando?
I just want to say that I'd like to see the numbers before I decide on which one to go with. I'd like to see how the numbers fall up. I especially like what Mr. Barton says, the different scenarios between the midterm or in October or further on, whatever that sounds like later. Thank you. That's all.
Mr. Arredondo?
Thank you, Ms. Cantu. This is not related to salary and benefit discussions per se, but this is circling back to Mr. Barton's, Dr. Barton, excuse me, his comments about the city of San Marcos, this 300% increase in drainage fees. I hope that the superintendent and his cabinet can work with city manager Lumbreras and his team to resolve this. But if not, let it be known now that I'm ready, willing, and able as an individual trustee to agendize this item, to direct staff to not pay this item until it's resolved at a policy making level. So that would be the ISD board discussing it with our city council if necessary. Obviously, we've seen, I think, our utility consumption decrease on the ISD side over the years, but our rates historically continuously go up. And so again, we're doing our due diligence on our end to keep costs down, but even being more responsible consumers is not being rewarded. And so hopefully, like I said, Mr. Cardona and everyone can deal with that internally, but if not, I really hope that that is brought back to this board to have a more robust policy decision on our relationship with the city of San Marcos when it comes to a 6-figure increase in drainage fees from year to year. And then the last thing, and this is just individually as we discuss scenarios, not that you need my vote and not that some of you might even want my vote, but for me to even consider a one-time supplemental mid-year whatever pay thing that people are considering, I would need to see like a dollar amount attached to that going right out the gate. Just individually telling an employee like, hey, you might get a raise in December. I don't know what that is. It could be $500. It could be $1,000. I don't know, but stay tuned. Just doesn't sit well with me individually. So as we discuss scenarios, if it is the will of this board to provide that one-time incentive pay mid-year, I hope that we can all agree that it needs to have a dollar amount attached to it and not just a big question mark. So I think that's all I have for today. Thank you, Ms. Cantu.
You're welcome. Ms. Mejia, I'm sorry I have not called on you yet, but please feel free to talk next.
Thank you. So I'm going to follow up on Ms. Halsey's statement on basically trying to make the $15 hourly wage available to our hourly workers. If we can make that happen, that would be great. I am a true believer that minimum wage should be starting at $15 at minimum. So I would like to see that happen. And I also agree with Mr. Arredondo's statement about, if we're going to be promising some type of incentive to our employees, there should be an amount attached to it, or, even a percentage. We can't be saying, you may get an incentive, probably not, we don't know, blah, blah, blah. There needs to be an amount or a percentage attached to it.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, you're next.
While we're just generally sounding off, I will, and I don't even think I'm going to vote on this, right? Because I'm going to be gone. But I really, really hope that we could just pass a generous compensation package soon in May or whenever that fairly rewards employees for their labor, rather than something less than with the promise of some sort of bonus as if they didn't earn it, if the board's willing, or, if the stars align in November, because that just sends the wrong message. I think we've been really aggressive with salaries for 6 years, and it hasn't gotten us in any trouble. Financially, we're in better shape than we've ever been. So I'd like this one in May to be in line with what we did year 1 and 2 of that sequence, rather than what we did in year 5, because secondarily, we had compensation come up at 5 out of 12 meetings, which I'd like to just handle it once appropriately, or like this board to handle it once appropriately, and then do the other business of the district in the other meetings. Because every time it's a push and pull, and it's more political than about merit. And, I don't like that means of handling it. The same reason I think $1 is a big raise for someone making $13, and there's nothing magical about 15 except it's a political talking point. It's not related to their performance. It's just aspirational. But anyway, I'm on both sides of that, but I hope that, and I don't know how much it'll cost yet, but that proposal that I laid out, I hope we can afford to do that, and then not have to do maybe we'll give you a bonus later if everything's perfect. Thanks.
Ms. Mejia?
I'm going to add on to Mr. McLaughlin's comment on that. I think that would be a really great idea. Is it possible to even create like a subcommittee on that?
We could, but I think that they're already working. I think they have to do their calculations. Mr. Barton, y'all are working on the and Ms. Munoz, y'all are working on the calculations, and we'll have something for us for May? Because you're saying you may not have this for, in 2 weeks, because it
Hey,
takes a
we
lot of work.
actually, Ms. Munoz and her team actually builds the compensation package, each one of these, the way you've described it. And we kind of think vertically. So Mr. McLaughlin's package, Ms. Halsey's package, Mr. Arredondo's. But last year you did it a whole different way at the meeting where you actually made a decision and you kind of picked individually and worked horizontally. So we're going to have the amount of each percentage. So if it was 1.25% for teachers, what is that amount? And then if administrators was something different, we'd have that amount and you could pick. And then at the end, I forget who said they'd like to know what the final numbers are. We'll give you what the projected deficit would be in contrast to our revenue. And this is all deficit spending, but it's the conversation that we have every year.
Hold on.
Sorry.
Hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we haven't run a deficit. Over the course of the last 6 years, we've run a surplus. So I don't, you say that, Mr. Barton, and then the paper talks about us running a deficit, but that's not true. Y'all project conservatively. We pass a budget that works. We put money back in fund balance. And then the next year, board spends deficit money. So I don't think that's true. I think that if you could at least couch that as projected or potential, I sure would appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'll work on that terminology, but I'd like to make sure we have a dividing line in time between HB3 and the old rules, because under the prior to HB3, the increasing property values, which came in after the budget decision, drove that budget up far more than trustees, the revenue, far more than trustees were told. Now it's very different. And we are starting this year with a $1.3 million deficit we approved last year. And so any additional spending, the extra revenue absolutely helps with that. But any deficit will add on year over year over year. And so we have to look at savings every single year to close that gap. And sometimes depending on the year, and last year's a wonderful example of the challenges with COVID-19, the district wasn't able to spend all of its money. And so we did return a great deal of money to trustees at the end of the year, but that wasn't because we underprojected revenue or did anything dramatic in the budget process. It was just the circumstance we lived through.
Well, you did underproject revenue. That was the whole circumstance. And since the 1980s, the administration in the San Marcos, it's different people, wasn't you? I'm not saying you. The administration in San Marcos has said, we're not going to have very much money. Board, don't spend very much money. The boards, had this tug of war with compensation. And then when we got here 6 years ago, some of us, we had compensation that was well below our neighbors, and we had a very poor applicant pool for teaching positions, and that hurt kids. And so we've, for over 6 years, changed that, and now we're on par with other districts of similar size and structure, and we've got a better applicant pool that helps kids, and we've put money back in fund balance. But I'll believe it when I see it, but every year we've been told, well, this is different. Don't look at that in the past. But the only consistency over the last 40 is that the admin, and it's how you should be, I guess. That's how y'all are trained and what you've got to be. You've got to be conservative on your projections, right? Because boards will just spend all the money. But I think if there's anywhere we spend it, this is one real important place. And I don't want, fear of the unknown to stop us from doing what's right by the teachers.
Absolutely, we are projecting an increase in revenue this year.
Because I remember when you were starting to say something before Mr. McLaughlin went on.
I was just gonna make a comment as you create salary compensation packages. Just a side note, as a recruiting standpoint, the $15 an hour for starting position is great. But I also want us to take into consideration honoring those auxiliary hourly staff members who have been here for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And just be cognizant, if we bump up to 15, that pay is going to look like our 2, 3 year, 5 year employees if you do approve a $15 starting. So just wanted to have that out.
Miss Hanson had her hand up and I couldn't see her, so she'll have to go next.
Yes, I have question and 2 clarifications. When I asked about the mid-year stipend, it was just whether or not that would be on what Mr. Barton would be presenting to us. I was not in favor one way or the other on that at this point. And then Mr. McLaughlin, go over your request. I had 3% for teachers, 2% for
Administration, that's correct. And then $1 across the board on the
Hourly.
with no
Okay.
specified minimum. So it should be $1 increase to everybody
Okay,
to try to limit the compression that Ms. Munoz was concerned about.
Okay, I thought it was 1% and I didn't quite get that. If we're looking at increasing beginning hourly, I think we have to look at continuing that on up, because that wouldn't be fair to those who, like Ms. Munoz said, have been here with the district. It's not just, okay, they get more money and we get, nothing. I think we have to look at a fair compensation all the way up for the hourly employees. And as a teacher who signed her contract for 32 years without an amount, I agree that we need to have an amount. That would be nice to know what you're signing.
I agree. I agree that it's nice for the teachers to know, having signed a blank contract for 20 years myself. So I agree with that. Mr. Arredondo, you've had your hand up for a while.
Thank you, Ms. Cantu. And I'm in no means wanting to speak for Trustee Halsey or Mejia, but at least the way that I've written my notes here based on trustee requests was that if some of those formulas endeavored to get us to a $15 minimum wage, that would reflect a $2 per hour increase at the lowest end of the hiring spectrum, but that $2 increase would then expand upwards for every employee in that pay grade. At least that's the way that I heard it. I could be wrong, but individually, I would not support a $2 raise for entry-level employees, but no raise for any other hourly employees. And I think we were all on the same page there. The other thing that I'm interested in when we see these calculations, and Ms. Munoz and Dr. Barton and all of you, as you work through this a la carte menu of salary and benefit options, is what that increase translates to for said employee. So a 1.5% raise for a San Marcos CISD teacher, what is that dollar amount? I understand that you give it to us in the aggregate of what that total cost is for the entire organization, but I'm curious to know what that would look like for said teacher who's getting that 1.5% increase. Similarly, for our hourly employees as well, and also our administrative employees. I agree with Mr. McLaughlin that I think for everyone, we have been very aggressive at paying them accordingly and addressing some systemic issues that happened during previous administrations and even more difficult budget years. And then as an aside to that, I understand that the administration has a recommendation of when they want this vote to take place, but I am still going to encourage, if possible, if we can do this in April. I think Mr. McLaughlin brings fair and balanced perspective in these conversations, and having his 6 years of experience voting on salary and benefits would be something that I'd be interested in. But that's just me. He can obviously say what he wants, but I'd like him to be a part of this vote and keep us on track and within bounds and fiscally responsible a little bit, not a lot, but because history shows us that we have done all right so far, even though it's been kind of gloom and doom the last couple of budget cycles, but we've made it out in a good way. So anyway, so thank you all so much. And that hopefully is the last I'm talking today.
Ms. Halsey.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Arredondo interpreted my intent correctly. I did intend it would be a $2 increase for all hourly employees. So that would bring our starting wages up to $15. And I agree almost entirely with what Mr. McLaughlin said. So I will save my points on that. But I did want to verify the revenue projection that I saw was about almost $82 million, correct?
Not sure if Andrew's going to move back on, or or the slides aren't up, I apologize. It's 81.699, so we're just about 81.7.
Okay, 81.7. And then without any change, I thought there were two different numbers given.
Yes, ma'am, we had a typo on our last slide.
So which number is it?
Right now, it is the one we had on the first slide. So it is 66.386, 66.3 million. But I'll tell you, every time we make a hire for a vacant position, that vacant position is budgeted at a certain point. And if we hire an experienced teacher, it comes at a higher salary. And every time right now with our retirement incentive, that someone that with a lot of experience leaves, we budget that at a little bit lower point. We don't budget a 20-year teacher for a vacancy. We budget a more moderate position. So that's going to move dramatically, or not dramatically, but continuously from now till we approve our budget. It won't be exactly that number when we approve it, especially after you guys make some decisions on compensation.
Right, but that, I mean, right now we're looking at, there's a $15 million gap between the projected and no increase. So it seems plausible that we can give very healthy increases without going into even a projected deficit.
No, ma'am. We're about 81% there for compensation. Salaries will be 81% of our budget right now before increases.
I had a question.
Okay, I just have one more follow-up, sorry. So okay. I'm looking forward to seeing those numbers, but, and I apologize if this was covered. My internet has been a little bit glitchy today, so I got phased out, but did we talk about the federal funding, and do we have an update on the second round of federal funding that's supposed to be coming? If we're gonna get that directly, if the state's gonna hold it, what we can use it for, et cetera?
That is still out there. It has not been announced. We are waiting anxiously to see. There's actually talk of a third round hanging out there too. It is the big issue is will they supplant our funding with that or supplement our funding? And that's not been told to us.
Okay, thank you.
When you're calculating all this, Ms. Munoz, could you tell us how many teachers are retiring? And then you budget those at entry level or mid-level?
For teachers, we budget at a 3-year teacher step. So as teachers retire or decide to resign, we budget at the 3rd step, and that's been consistent with the last couple of years.
Okay. Right now, do we have a number on how many are retiring?
Not off the top of my head, but Dr. Baez can send that over to all of you.
Right. So we have 17 that have signed up for the early incentive that you all approved, but several folks are retiring that are not taking part in that because they want to utilize their days. So I'll get you that number, and that is also changing daily.
Thank you, Dr. Baez. Anyone else have questions? And I apologize, we went past our time.
Oh,
but
I'm sorry. Can I have one more just comment?
Yes,
So,
Mr. McLaughlin.
since I know this is going to come up, I'd like some, before we approve or when we consider, I understand Ms. Munoz's concern about compression, and I don't believe she was saying, I speak for her, but from our discussions of compression in the past, which is something I've been paying attention to for several years, like a lot of you, right? But it doesn't mean that the new $2 raise at $15 is going to make more than someone that was there before. It's that when we have a whole lot of aggressive increases on the back end or in the near years, we could have a 10-year employee who was making just a little bit more than a first-year employee because they benefited from the aggressive late year action, but they had many years of inaction. So I could be a 10-year custodian, cleaning 2/3 of the school. I'm just doing this as by way of example. And a first year with less experience and less ability, cleaning 1/3 of the school, and I might make 50 cents more or something. And I think that is something we have to be mindful of. We did that to ourselves like year 3, year 4, and then we had to redo the whole scale to clean some of that up. And so I think Ms. Munoz was saying we want to be cautious not to walk right back in that. So maybe to prevent that, we could get a distribution on the hourlies by task at like frequency and wage, I think that would help me understand if that was happening.
Ms. Cantu.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm back.
Oh.
Like Mr. McLaughlin's comment, I am curious to know, I know we did a staffing study, I think through TEA in a few years past that said we were overstaffed in some areas, in particular hourly employees and subcategories. And I'm not going to go into that because I don't want to speak out of turn on that. But I'm curious to know when the last study of that type of programming took place. And additionally, and I shared this with Ms. Cantu several years ago, but I honestly just forgot about it. I'm really curious to know if we have staffed up when it comes to like facilities and maintenance, as we've opened new campuses, new facilities, an indoor student activity center, a football stadium, all of the additional square footage that we are now asking our maintenance staff and facility staff to maintain. Similarly, when we opened the athletic facility, we said, you know, not only are varsity sports going to play in this football stadium, but junior varsity sports and freshmen. And so obviously there's been a subsequent increase in that footprint. And I'm assuming we have our custodial teams out there after every event, maintaining those facilities. And far be it for me to, again, speak to what that type of planning or capital outlay is for staff. But I mean, I knew like the 3 or 4 custodians who worked at San Marcos High School when I was in school there. And so I just want to make sure that it's not that same team or the same number of staff members there who are now responsible for that entire footprint out at that complex. So if there is some way to get that information as well, when it comes to maintenance and operations across the organization, I would be interested in making sure that we're staffed accordingly in those departments, seeing as how we do have a lot more square footage, thanks to the taxpayers approving the construction of those buildings. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. Barden, any final questions or comments?
Thank you for the opportunity to present to you. Looking forward to our meeting when we bring back compensation to you.
Okay, Clem, just kidding. I have one more thing, and I promise it's the last one. So since we didn't speak about it, I'm assuming we're maintaining benefits for all employees as is, no cost. No trustee requested that. I will if I need to, but that the ISD continues to pay the full premium monthly for every employee, or that is based on our.
Are you talking about insurance? Okay.
Yes, ma'am. We didn't talk about it, so I just wanted to make sure that that's what we were doing.
Ms. Munoz?
Ms. Cantu, just so everyone knows, in June, we received the updated premium cost from TRS. So we can look at that amount should it increase and bring that to the board. Historically, it's increased $5, $10, depending on our plan. And we can bring that forward so the board knows how much specifically that increase will be to have a zero premium plan.
Thank you, Ms. Munoz. Anyone else? I guess we're done with our workshop. Thank you, everybody, especially those people that are working.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Good afternoon.